I'm Bill Hartzer, and I do a lot of webmastering and search engine optimization and so forth. And let's talk today a little bit about QA testing, quality assurance testing, and how we can not only just test things, but fix it and make it the best it can be. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Great. Thank you. Brian Bernknopf. I'm the Managing Director for QA Consultants USA. We're based here in Dallas, Texas, with headquarters up in Toronto, Ontario, specializing in quality assurance, software testing, and usability testing, along with a number of other disciplines under QA.
Yeah, and I'm Brice McBeth, founder and CEO of REAP Marketing. We do a lot of conversion rate optimization, which includes a lot of A/B testing, where we get into trying to make websites perform better. So we're based here in Dallas and work with a number of clients nationwide.
And that's actually how this all came about, the idea of build it, test it, fix it, and then best it. And the idea here is we work in such a tight community, the way that we bring sites together, but we all have our role to play in how we essentially build a better product for our customers.
Okay, so why don't you dig in more on quality assurance? Maybe tell us a little bit about that, Brian.
Sure, Brice. So what we do in QA consultants and QA as a discipline or as an industry, quality assurance often gets discussed with other words, testing or quality control, depending on your background. We certainly see those as different activities. A lot of what we do in quality assurance is the process, where testing is the activity. So if we say that testing is the act of identifying a defect, or in some cases not identifying the defect, quality assurance is the process that puts that together, brings products to market.
Yeah, so with respect to conversion optimization refers to the process of making the marketing better or making the website better, so that the people who are already seeing the marketing or are already on the website will do what you want them to do. So the sad truth is that only 1% of the people on an average website, or on average, people convert at a 1% rate. So out of 100 people on a website, only one of them will do what you want them to do. So conversion rate optimization has everything to do with trying to optimize that process and getting that 1 to a 2%, 2% to a 3%. And a lot of times that involves A/B testing, which is a very sort of scientific and math and evidence-based process for determining what version of the marketing or creative or copy convinces people to do business with you and ultimately do what you want them to do.
And that ties so well into what we do day in and day out. Roughly 80% of our business is mobile applications or software as a service or websites. And in those applications, they have to work. And that's the core of what QA is ensuring a process that time and again, these changes that we make, and sometimes on a daily or hourly basis, are not affecting the behavior of a site or of an application, certainly not negatively, right? So even before you have a chance to go from 1% to 2%, if you hit a site and it's slow performing or it does not work functionally, the user is going to abort even there, and you don't even have the chance for that 1%.
So the websites and search engine optimization, from an SEO perspective, we want the best content on there, and we want lots of content, lots of text on pages and websites, and we want people to stick around and read a lot of stuff. But but at the same time, with conversion rate optimization, we're trying to have a happy medium here where we're not preventing by adding content, we're not preventing a loss of revenue. We want people to come to a website and fill out a form or convert into a sales lead. But from an SEO standpoint, we kind of want the opposite, because the SEOs want more content. We want more. We want people to stick around the site. And so, how do we prevent? How do we? The question really is for both of you is how. I want to put content on there, but you all want to At the same time, make sure we maximize revenue and we don't lose any revenue at the same time. So where do we fall of fixing that particular those problems?
Well, how about I address the revenue loss prevention and you could do maximization, right? So from a loss prevention, I think that's the bulk of the work that we do and our mission for our customers. So we're focused on, does it work, right? If it doesn't work, and that's just could be pure testing, and certainly the idea of the process behind quality assurance is making sure that the functionality is there. So from the bulk of the content, the volume of the content, that doesn't matter as much to us. I mean, we do usability testing and content validation, spelling and image, and the way those things are set up. But really when it comes to, is it forms that need to be filled out? Is it the performance of the site or any level of interactivity, especially on mobile, right? So as we move, whether it's responsive design sites or just real interactive applications on a mobile or even on a web portal, that's where all the opportunities for failure exist, and that's kind of our mindset, is looking for those opportunities. And we see every defect we fix and hopefully prevent, and that's a big part of quality assurance versus testing, is the idea of instilling processes that prevent the defects. As we do that, it allows us to, in our view, maximize the opportunity for revenue within the site. Certainly prevent losses, right? Any customer that aborts a transaction or that leaves the site for functionality or poor performance, those are certainly security and things like that. Those are all areas where we see our value back to the customer and the end result.
Yeah, so when I think about how that compares to conversion optimization and A/B testing specifically is I think where you fix a problem or you prevent a problem through quality assurance and catching those problems before they happen, which could have led to revenue loss. And the case with A/B testing, we're really trying to make the experience the best it could possibly be to maximize the amount of conversion. So a lot of times product teams and marketers are obsessed with design and functionality and more features and more this and more that to keep up with competitors or to get ahead of competitors. And we become enamored with all these things, and a lot of times the sad truth is that 65% of all A/B tests, not just my A/B test but industry wide, will result in a failure, which means a lot of our times our ideas or features and functionality just aren't really that good, or else people don't like them as much as we do. So it's really important to do testing on our end, number one, so you can identify which ones are winners and which ideas are losers, thereby also preventing revenue loss to some degree. But in the event that the feature or functionality works, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best piece of functionality for the bottom line. So A/B testing really helps substantiate that and provide you insurance in the event that this idea doesn't actually benefit the user experience.
So just on that note, and I think you mentioned two things that are really important there. One, we always talk about QA as your insurance policy for development, for the life cycle of your product, right? I've had clients that consider QA a tax on the IT and the software development life cycle. You certainly have to pay the premium. We look at, certainly those are components of how you implement QA processes and testing best practices in order to make sure that you have that policy, that you're preventing as much of that loss as possible. On the other hand, we also look at it as ways to optimize, right? So we have customers that are on the marketing side. They look at QA as the way to get their site out there as quickly as possible, and it becomes almost a revenue generation or revenue opportunity for them, because the sooner they get their site live, whether it's ad revenue or retail revenue or whatever the objective of that site is, they look at QA as a way to get them there faster. And exactly what you just said, Brice, the idea that you may make these changes very rapidly, and that's what's really interesting about CRO is I've learned more about what your business is. You can make those changes and identify those opportunities for change very quickly. That drives us nuts, right? Because from a QA perspective, we have to have a methodical approach, we have to have methodology and so forth. So the idea as we do more and more agile projects, as we do more and more real-time testing or CI/CD, CT engagements, is sometimes it is marketing or CRO that's driving these changes so rapidly we may deploy 2-3 times a day. So from a QA perspective, we have to be able to be nimble enough to keep up with those changes.
Yeah, and I'll say, there's a lot of times too where, big pieces of functionality can take a long time to develop. And, a lot of times with A/B testing, we can help vet the direction of those and course correct the development of those features along the way. So, speaking of, being agile is, helping these product teams or marketing teams come up with smaller, pieces of deliverable to that will stack up to the final piece of functionality to make sure that what in the end is designed optimally. We had a client that has a customization wizard for customizing envelopes, right? So the wizard is actually really cumbersome and sort of complex, and they knew they had to redesign it. But then you run into the risk of taking weeks, maybe months to redevelop the wizard, and with the price tag that could entail could be tens of thousands of dollars to rebuild this thing. But then what if it is still cumbersome and people still don't like it, right? Even if it works, the user may not like it. So we were able to, with this client, run some tests, and we actually found that if we simply just put a phone number, a large, legible phone number, a click-to-call phone number in the header, then we found that that the users would engage in the customization wizard at a much higher rate, purely because the presence of the phone number gave them the confidence to start the process, and if they started it, they could finish it. They found that they could just finish it on their own. So just the mere presence of the phone number increased the conversions by 65% without even increasing any phone calls. So,
and I would say, and thereby reducing the defects or the opportunities for loss by re-architecting or changing something that, quite frankly, wasn't broken.
Yeah, and on the SEO side, it increases the speed of the site because you don't have all the extra code on there for all that stuff. So,
Brian, as a QA consultant, how do you use testing to improve and ensure that we have great usability?
Failures, right? What we see there is these are ways that we can, are they usable, right? What does the usability mean for a given site or customer? So from that perspective, we have heuristics and we have a methodology that we'll go through as we're part of the design, hopefully part of the design. Unfortunately, sometimes we're called in after the site has been built to provide testing services, and there we don't really have the opportunity to put together a QA program. But from a testing perspective, we certainly test to those two components.
Yeah, I'd say for A/B testing, A/B testing is really a part of a larger umbrella of conversion rate optimization, practices, right? So conversion optimization encompasses some best practices things. So these are things that have either been published or people accept as a truth because it has worked for a number of other companies, or provides the most security, or it provides something of material worth. So things like, we accept keeping forms, short as a best practice because the more people are going to be inclined to fill the form out if it's shorter. We accept something like putting CAPTCHA on the form as a best practice because it prevents spam traffic or whatnot. If content is king, then speed is emperor, right? So the speed of the site, it's painful to be on a phone trying to access a site and it taking a long time to load. So these are what we consider best practices to help with the experience on the website that'll ultimately help conversions. But the other aspect of conversion optimization comes with vetting of ideas. Right, so, and like I said a while ago, 65% of all of our ideas that we test under an A/B testing scenario will result in a failure. So not all of our ideas are as good as they are in our head when we actually put it to test. So you take the examples that I just gave. CAPTCHA, great technical purpose, and but we find that Moz just came out with a report that said that just the mere presence of a CAPTCHA form can decrease conversion rates by 33% on that form. We've run tests where, as far as keeping the form short, we've run tests that actually have found that in some cases it's actually better to have a long form because it actually is more in line with what the expected outcome of that form is. So people are more willing to give more personal information if the outcome is more personalized. So these accepted truths and these best practices aren't always the best. There are ways to make it better, but you don't know which ones are the good ideas and which ones are not the bad. Which ones are the bad ideas without going through the rigor of testing.
Hey Brice, I got a question for you. How do you test new features and new functionality to make sure that everything is working properly?
Yeah, so if you go into it with this mindfulness that maybe not all my ideas are the best ideas, then really the role that A/B testing plays in that scenario is providing you the insurance to make sure that it actually provides a benefit to the end user and ultimately to the business. So there's a lot of great video case studies from companies like Spotify. In fact, their creative director has a TED Talk where she talks about how she ran through a lot of the user interface design through A/B tests so they could substantiate which of their features that they added were actually good features. So, simple things like where to add the play button on the album cover. They tested, a sort of a dark interface versus a light interface, like what you see on iTunes or whatnot. So every one of those tests results in a fact-based, mathematical answer that tells you exactly what people prefer and what the best outcomes are. So for us, testing the functionality really has to do with providing you insurance to make sure that you're not rolling out something that seemed like a great idea based on whatever data, all this data that we have access to. The web is marvelously measurable. You can use, Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics. I mean, there's tons of ways to track user behavior, but there's also qualitative data, and use all of this data to inform ideas of what to do about it. But just because you use data to inform the decision doesn't mean that your resulting decision or idea from that data is the best idea.
Yeah, the idea of using what we call production analytics to drive our QA strategy or our test plans is a big part of what we do, especially for applications that are either being redesigned or are already in production in whatever capacity. That user behavior is directly an input into how we build that test strategy. What devices are used or how often certain pieces of the functionality are used. So we have just so much data available to us now as we build these test strategies that allows us to bring that back into the programmatic approach to software testing and quality assurance. And then kind of to the other part of the question, testing new features and functionalities is our bread and butter. That's what we do. It's obviously 70-80% of our engagements are around new feature development, new feature or functionality that's being added to a particular application or a particular site. And our testing that we do as part of that includes your core functional testing. And we do that both manually with fingers on keys, and we also do it through automated testing, especially if it's being done. It's a feature that's going to be reused over and over again. So the idea of automating those tests so that every time Brice comes up with a new idea, and 65% of that time when it fails, we can test and then test the new idea and the new idea, and we do that in a more efficient manner with test automation. But we also include performance testing, as Brice mentioned as well. And the idea of what is the expected user load, we get that data from production sometimes, as well as from the estimations of the product owners. But we then do performance, load, volume testing of those applications to make sure that they not only withstand what we expect, but then what if it's greater than what we expect, and to understand where those the defects or risk areas of our particular site might be for performance. And then we can get into security testing or compatibility testing across all the different devices and operating systems that are out there. And that's where some functionality works great in certain cases, and that's very similar to some of the A/B testing by different browser types, for example. So we look at that as well from a functionality perspective.
The 65% failure rate is the industry number, just for the record. My ideas are much better than that.
Exactly.
I don't have any
Of
numbers
course.
because I just implement my ideas. Just kidding.
Okay, so a lot of companies have not updated their websites since the 1990s. Their web design is still the same, and they've been using it for years and years, and they think it's great. But how do we know when we need to test a new website design? Brice?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question. I wish more companies are ready to make that change, would come to us before they, in many cases, about 65% of the time, they do damage by launching a new a website design. And it's funny because no business ever comes to their agency and says, hey, I want a really ugly website. Has anybody ever said that? I don't think, has anybody ever told you that? Nobody ever says they want an ugly website, right? But if you think about the world's like top performing websites, like let's say Amazon, that's not the sexiest and coolest website on the planet, but what you get from Amazon is a level of predictability, clarity in what you're getting, credibility in the company you're working for, and the sense of that you can get something that you can't get anywhere else. Now the product can be a commodity, but they have communicated through their design some level of confidence that you can only get this product at this reasonable price. You're not going to get, taken to the cleaners on it, and you're going to get it, within say 24 hours, right? So the experience that you get on Amazon is unlike what you might get somewhere else. So to answer your question, when a company is considering doing a new website design, the earlier the better. So worst case scenario, you can do it just before the new design's about to go live, and you can run an A/B test conceptually on the new design versus the old design, and prove and just prevent that kind of that level of insurance, right? Make sure that the new design, even though it might be functional, might look really good and make the company feel good about their brand. Make sure it's not shooting themselves in the foot from a conversion perspective. If you back it back out a little bit further, then a lot of the concepts that are introduced in the new design can be tested along the way before a new design's even sent to the design team. So a lot of those ideas that inform the design can be vetted through A/B testing. If you back it out even further, perhaps when you're starting to talk about re-platforming the site, for instance, that probably introduces a whole series of QA concerns and intrigue for someone like you, but a fear for someone like us. Then the whole purpose involved with re-platforming a site can manifest itself in functionality and design and things like that. That can be tested prior to jumping full board onto a platform that may not be the right thing for that company. So it's a really complex question to answer for us because there's so many layers to it. But the answer is the sooner the better, but certainly before they do it would be ideal.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have the simple answer, which is as soon as possible. We also look at it in two categories. Your question was, when do we test a website redesign? If your website is your front door and a marketing portal, that's one thing. If your website is your product, if it is your application, if it has a high degree of functionality, if it's a software as a service component, or if it's a mobile application that is your business, and that's where the revenue could be, obviously, like the Amazon example, where you drive your revenue from it, or it could be a product that provides certainly a high degree of functionality. By all means, that's where a lot of our efforts are, right? And the amount of functionality that goes into these, it's a product. We can call it a site. You have as a URL, but it is a product, and in a lot of cases, it is our customers' only product. It's what they do. It's how they drive revenue. So in that case, that responsibility certainly lies with us in a part to make sure that functionality being delivered in a version upgrade or in a new release to that site has gone through a thorough level of quality assurance, including the processes for defect prevention, but also the activities of testing to make sure we identify those defects before launch. And that could be functionality, performance, security, and then of course usability and integrating the CRO comments or design team comments as part of that process. We have the value or the opportunity to do some of that testing before functionality is even created. So we can test from requirements, we can test from wireframes and initial components, especially as we start to build the QA processes. If it's test data that's going to be used to make sure that we're not putting personal data or production PII data at risk, or whether we're using the ability to automate some of these processes in advance. So we can do a lot of that work during the design process as the features are being figured out.
So there are actually some opportunities, though, to do some website design testing, or if you will, where we can, rather than having the main website with the majority of the traffic be tested, we can actually use, like, for example, certain types of traffic, like pay-per-click traffic, and send certain keywords from Google, Google AdWords, for example, and to certain types of landing pages that may have a different design, so than actually the main website. So, Brice, can you talk a little bit about maybe testing basically taking certain types of traffic, your pay-per-click traffic, your paid traffic, maybe from display or banner ads, setting that traffic to certain types of landing pages and doing testing that way and figuring out which ones convert, rather than just totally going all in and saying, okay, let's just test the main website.
Yeah, obviously it's a really good way to do it, because it goes back to the fact and evidence-based research, right? You are performing research when you do something like that. You build a landing page that has a design that's reflective of the new concept that you want to introduce, and you run a portion of the traffic to this new landing page. And it's important to do, a portion of it, not all of it, so that when you split the traffic, you have stats to compare it against, right? So if you just launch the whole campaign on this new design and it doesn't work, there's other variables that kind of come into play there. The keywords that were selected, the ad copy that was presented, the ad banner design that was presented to the person that they clicked on, in conjunction with the design of the page, the forms that were used, the lead magnets that were used to get people to perform an action. So if that's done in isolation, you never really know which of those variables is what made the new design work well or not work well. So that's certainly, in the course of this conversation, we've been talking about A/B split testing on a site or page, but that's an example where it's certainly very easy for many people to even use tools like, ClickFunnels or something like that, where you can actually spin up new pages and new concepts really easy, and just split your, social or, search traffic in half. Or send a smaller portion to the new concept to see, if it really is the new design that performs differently, or if it's something else about the whole campaign.
Yeah, the only thing I can add to that is, if you're going to split your traffic, you need to make sure that the functionality is sound on both, so that it's not another variable into why one was more positively received than the other. Right?
Yeah, well, okay, so one more comment too. I think, the web is marvelously measurable, right? So when you run an ad campaign, you've got data about the actual ads themselves, how many times relevant searches were performed, how many times your ad was searched, what position it was when it was served up, the click-through rate, how many people as a percentage will actually click on that ad. Then you've got the number of visitors on the page, how many people, how long they stayed, how many pages they saw, how many people actually filled the form out, how many people placed a phone call. So each one of those numbers tells a different story. So just because the campaign doesn't work doesn't mean the design's not very good, right? So if you got 3 leads on version A and 5 leads on version B, then that doesn't mean version A wasn't as good. It could have just not received as many visitors, or maybe it didn't receive as high quality visitors. So there's the element of making sure you get significant amount of data that's collected. You're not operating off of a small sample size, right, and making sure all the variables are equal, other than the one that you're isolating and really putting a test.
So Brian, we've talked a lot about testing websites, but let's talk a little bit more about testing apps. and app functionality to make sure our apps work.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. I think everybody loves to talk about apps. It's a huge part of our business for sure, and certainly as we work with a lot of agencies, right? So a lot of the agencies we're working with are either building apps for their customers. They could be their core functionality or their core product, or they may be one-time use apps or part of campaigns. When we look at app testing, and this is certainly it's becoming obviously more and more ubiquitous, we look at functionality and compatibility. We of course do security and performance and usability, things we've all talked about. But at the end of the day, the functionality of the app itself, and whether it's a hybrid model or HTML5, responsive web, or a native application, the functionality has to be tested. And I think that's one of the things that we see as a misunderstanding or a misconception or something that's not even known when we engage and start these conversations. It may only take a couple hours worth of development to do a particular feature update or change, but then we look at how does that functionality work across multiple platforms, right? And all the combinations that have to take place. So we first have the functionality, and does that functionality work as designed? And then we bring it to compatibility. And the compatibility is where we turn on its head this old school approach where QA should be 30% of development, right? Well, if we only have to develop it once, but we have to test it against every operating system and browser and every platform, even if it's just Android and iOS, then we, then we have different versions of those operating systems, and then the different browsers on those operating systems, and then of course we look at different screen sizes and the components of the platform. That's where the volume of QA can increase significantly. So we address that certainly both by the type of testing we do, and then by automated testing to reduce the amount of volume.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys knew this, but you actually can only analyze data from things that you've collected data on.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, so think about that and write that down and sleep on it and get back to me. But so as far as launching new apps and testing app functionality, it's like you really have to kind of plan in advance. And what is my expected outcome, and what am I hoping to get out of this? Because if you're not tracking those things, you can only theorize and take a shot in the dark. And we know based on things I've said earlier today that you can take a shot in the dark and launch something new, and at best you're sort of treading water with trying to make improvements to the website or app. So I would say, just as a marketer and not necessarily a product manager, I'd say most of our testing is done more on the sort of like web side of things. But if you take even a tool or an app or a software service like Asana, right, project management tool, they're constantly releasing new pieces of functionality. They could have a feature list a mile long of things that they're trying to add to their product constantly. But they found that one of the number one things that they could do to increase their subscriber base really had nothing to do with functionality within the app. It had to do with what they were calling it and what the feature language is, right? So I'm taking your app question and going back to the marketing on the website to promote their new version. They found just by taking the phrase teamwork without email to move work forward, they got an increase in subscribers by 15%, which is more than they've gotten from any one piece of functionality they've launched in the past. So.
Well, and the other thing you said, with a lot of our customers, they don't have, for example, the next iPhone while it's still being developed, right? They don't, obviously from an OS perspective, there's ways to have development copies and beta copies and so forth. But some of our customers have come to us, again, after the fact, but they're in need of QA services when the first thing that happens is everybody either on purpose or automatically updates their iOS that night, right? And all of a sudden, they're getting complaints from their CIOs or their business users saying, hey, our app is not working on my phone. And that's the call no one wants to get. We have techniques, we have approaches, and as you said, this is what, if the device doesn't exist, then we have to be ready to go as soon as that device is available to us. If the OS is the change that's happening, it doesn't even have to be a change on the site. That's the thing. It doesn't have to be functionality. that is being updated or modified. It's the environment in which your application, or in this case your app, exists. So an OS update or a hardware update certainly can change that behavior, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively, but we have to be ready and prepared to test that when whatever that change is available.
So as a company, do you have to have literally every device that comes out on the market, every new device and every old device and every...
Yes, and we have to have the ability to use those devices. So certainly our device library grows. We keep what we call a whitelist and a blacklist, right? So we keep devices that always have to be available in a physical lab. We also work with a lot of partners who have virtual labs or physical labs that are accessed remotely, right? Because there's economies of scale there. So for the most common devices, and certainly this is one of the things that where we work with our customers on, the smaller shops who aren't going to have all of the devices. And I think a good story about that is a lot of our customers do their testing, I'll say our customers before they're our customers, do their testing by sending out an email. Does anybody have the latest, S8 or iPhone 10 or who's got it? Come into the room where we're designing something so we can see what it looks like, and they put the app on that way. Our focus is obviously a little bit more methodical, and so yeah, to that point, we have to have whatever devices are available to us, and that also includes the desktops, right? So the different OSs, Mac versus Windows, different versions, and then the browsers loaded up as well.
Yeah, so sorry to take over here, but I'm just really curious because there's a lot of overlap here with, some of whether we're doing the work or our partner agencies are doing some work with even things as, we're talking about big website changes and apps, but something as simple as email campaigns and email marketing, right? It's like, we'll have, or our agency partner will have a list of items that they quality check before the email will go out. Right. But inevitably, every once in a while, something slips through that doesn't work on a certain browser or on a certain platform or whatnot. Right. So is that something you guys do as well?
So we talked about it. That's that.
Do you have a card? Can I?
Yeah, exactly. We'll talk after this. That's exactly the reason we do what we call automated regression, right? The idea that these are the things that have to work every time we release. And email marketing or just marketing technology companies, so as they integrate, and again, we work with a lot of design shops and a lot of agencies, we become that capacity for them. So it doesn't have to be the change to the app itself, but if your campaign isn't going to run because there was an update to iOS last night, you need to know about that, right? And we have methods to put that, and that could be manual or automated, but the idea of going through that list of tests, that's essentially what our capacity is for.
So I have a relative who still has a flip phone. Does that mean that you still have to have that the really, really, really old, the first original iPhone to test, in your library? Is that a case where you still have those phones? I'd love to see that whole library.
Yeah, we still use a PC Junior at the house.
Sure, we'll go to the museum, we'll pull it out, and we'll use it for testing. What we do is there's two parts of that. One is Brice's answer, which is it's the data, right? So if your app is being used by, we used to call them dumb phones, I think we call them feature phones now, right? So if your app is being used by that, obviously it's not an app, right? But if it's an SMS type of program that's still being used, and you have the data that says 90% of our business is coming from SMS text on flip phones, great. We will certainly work with you on that, right? Obviously the data will drive what that is, and that includes sunset operating systems and sunset devices themselves. And that's part of that's actually the difference between testing and quality assurance, and putting together a plan that is risk-based. So what is the risk of a user on a feature phone or on an iPhone 1 or whatever being upset that they can't access your site? Is that a real occurrence? And we'll go through that type of process before investing in building test strategies and bringing those devices to the test.
Now imagine if we combined our data, right? Like it's not just a list, obviously you can produce a list of things that are broken that need to be fixed for certain environments. Right. But then there's this element of, hey, you can keep working on this for umpteen hours and not get it fixed, or there's so many devices that you could spend that much time and not ever get to all the devices. So at some point, there's a number that says it's not worth the time to fix for these devices that aren't used enough for it to really matter, right? It's an insignificant amount of risk to just skip it.
It's a diminishing return. We talk about risk-based testing, and that is exactly how we approach it, right? Where is your cost in not even fixing it, but even coding it to support that? And what we do see, and this again comes, it's an odd thing that this comes from QA, but what we'll see is, hey, this particular feature is never going to run on IE11 on a desktop, right? So now you have, as a developer or as a product owner, the opportunity to produce a message to your customer or potential customer about what they should do in this case, or what page do they see, versus just giving them a bad experience, right? And that's part of that usability testing, right? What happens if I use unsupported browsers? What happens if I use unsupported devices? So that can all be part of it, but it has to be tied to where is the real value and the risk of what's trying to get out the door today.
What's interesting, I have been going back through various SEO projects, and looking back at old versions of websites. There was a time where on our website it was very acceptable at the bottom to say this website best viewed in Netscape or best viewed in Internet Explorer. You know, I'm trying to remember when there was a time where we all stopped. Actually, we stopped putting that on our sites, best viewed in this particular browser. And for historical purposes, I'd like to look back. But now we're at the point where, yes, we're actually able to design, especially with responsive designs. That's right. So with responsive, though, how does responsive design come into play with A/B testing on different devices and responsive versus non-responsive and mobile versions and so forth? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, oh my gosh, I could almost do a whole nother session just on responsive design and mobile testing, right? Because I think for a lot of marketers and designers and developers, responsive design is a checkbox. Okay. Or in some cases, maybe they upgrade their philosophy. It's mobile first, so they're taking that as sort of their the first thing that they're thinking about, so they can set an order of precedence to, designing around what people are using for their intent on a particular device, right? So, but just because that they thought about the mobile first, or because it's responsive, again goes back to it. Just because you've got it doesn't mean that you've made it the best it can possibly be. So there's still a certain amount of testing that can be done on mobile, and especially within responsive design. Everything from the ordering of where the call to actions lay out on the page to how accessible things are. So for a restaurant website, it's you really want easy directions, ability to make reservations, view the menu. And things like that. You might want a little bit richer experience on a desktop if somebody's sitting at a station and actually browsing the website. Just because you've checked those boxes doesn't mean you've provided the best experience. We've always encouraged constantly trying new things to get people to the places that they trying to get to on the site.
Yeah, and I think that the platforms that are available to the designers, right, and the content management systems, they make that easy. They make it a checkbox, right? Do you want this to be responsive, and how does it work, and so forth? And then the hard work comes in, because then we want to customize it. Then we want to make it a richer experience, as you said, and that's where we see the opportunity for risk, right? Every time somebody touches something, that's where the risk is injected. And that's where having that process to support it allows us to mitigate that.
If you find, Bill, that every once in a while, it's not funny, I'm going to resist the urge to say hilarious, but every once in a while a client will come to us and they want help undoing some damage that was done with a new site or a new mobile design or whatnot. Have you found, like the old, people upgrade from the pinch and zoom, and now they have responsive, and all of a sudden their conversions have dropped. So it's like, it's best practice of responsive design. But there are cases actually where the pinch and zoom worked a little bit better, right, from a conversion perspective.
Right.
You find that any of those websites that you're referring to back in the 1900s that actually like work better than some of the newer designs?
They do, and there are certain cases. Some of the websites I've worked with are in the B2B space, and we have to understand that the actual user who is going to be buying that service or product or service, and so there are situations where somebody, for example, is working at a hospital, and they're ordering, say, certain equipment, say a surgeon or scalpels, and they're sitting at a system that is, an older style Microsoft type of terminal that hasn't been upgraded for 10 years. And the browsers are locked down to a certain extent. And so they don't have the option to go to Google. That always has to go through Bing or Microsoft products. And that's how they browse the web. And so the focus is making sure that website works, just for the majority of their users, which is, a web browser that's a 10-year-old web browser. And those are the customers. And so a lot of it, from an SEO standpoint, we look at analytics, and really you can see what operating system majority of the customers for the past couple of years, and what browsers, and how they're, and what screen sizes. And so that, and of their particular customers. Sometimes some websites we've got, only 5% of the traffic is mobile versus desktop. Other websites you'll have the complete opposite. And so from that perspective, there are still a lot of sites that it does not make sense, from an SEO standpoint, to even have a mobile version of the site, because 99% of their, or 90% of their customers are still on a desktop and on a locked down browser, that they don't have extra options.
We find that there's quite a bit of cases where the old design, as much as businesses want innovative, clean, white space,
right,
just like Apple.
Yep.
That's the request we get, right? I want a site that's just like Apple, completely innovative, and those are the ones that tend to not do as well for some reason.
Well, you have to address the lowest common technology denominator, right? And at the same time, that might be your, as you said, the higher risk area, the bulk of your revenue or the bulk of your activity.
So I want to kind of go into a little bit area where testing is, and I know you probably have some comments, but on AI and how artificial intelligence is actually, we think about looking at the Google search results, okay, for example. Well, I know that they're constantly testing their UI and their design, and basically and shifting things based on, and making decisions on colors and placement and fonts and so forth based on testing. And so where do we fall in the future? Whereas we have, how does a company integrate AI, if you will, in their web design or their, even in the UI, whereas the system is constantly testing. And so that you're not just saying, making a decision, we're going to test this versus this, where they're constantly kind of using AI to figure out where people are clicking and where the cursor is going and so forth, and evolving that web design based on AI. Where are we going with AI in the future when it comes to testing?
Yeah, so this is pretty, it's interesting to watch all this stuff, evolve, right, and innovate. I'm not I'm obsessed over optimization of websites and apps and things like that. So it's hard for me to project exactly where it's all going to land. It's certainly interesting to watch it be incorporated, but it's hard for me to sort of forecast exactly what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years from now. But I do, when things like this emerge, I tend to take a sort of a Jeff Bezos type style approach to it, which is, what are the things that are consistent, will be consistent from now to the next 20 years, right? And those will root me in the fundamentals of testing and optimization. The things that will stay constant about these websites are they're a source of information, it's how people find contact, it's where they find solutions to their problems. So as long as I kind of stay up on kind of those types of trends and kind of be a thought leader in that area, then the rest of it just sort of is, the environment around it, I guess. Yeah.
Well, so I have a little bit of it, right? And I think I have a little different view, and we look at it from the point of view that there are 2 ways to approach AI or cognitive systems as it relates to technology or the software part of quality assurance. One is, how do we test those systems, which I think is for a different forum altogether. And then how do we use those systems in test, right? So you could talk about on the former, is the cognitive system, is it providing you the data you expected? And how do you trust one system over another, right? You can have 2 AI systems give you a health prognosis, and they may be different. How do you trust one or not, right? Again, that's for a much deeper conversation. On the other side, it's how do we use these systems? And you hit it right on the head. I mean, this is just at the beginning of our conversations. But can we as QA professionals and technologists use what's coming available to us in AI and cognitive systems to benefit our product, our ability to test a site? I think you certainly alluded to the idea that you can have ongoing analytics coming out of this through some sort of cognitive system that either drives A/B testing or drives featured discussions. We would look at it from the standpoint of, can we have AI, and there's certainly a lot of, I'll call it experimentation or discussion happening right now, is can we use these systems to actually conduct the testing and to produce the test strategy that might be needed based on either A, what they're driving out of the analytics, or B, just the idea that you can have a cognitive system approach a product in a more efficient way than, let's say, individuals. I hope that kind of gets to it. Yeah.
Sure. From a user perspective, when we go onto a website, it seems like we have to be more conscious about whether or not what information we put on a form. Everything now is, websites are going to SSL and HTTPS, and how do we address, as creators of websites and doing all this testing and so forth, and testing forms, for example, how do we test the security aspects of this? Where does security come in so that we can make our website visitors more comfortable about giving their information to us and filling out a form? Where does security fall into all of this?
Yeah, so great question, right? I mean, look at Equifax, look at Target, look at Home Depot, right? As product creators or site creators, it's not just the data that our customers are giving to us, but it's how we protect that data, right? And you have any number of examples that are very public and some that aren't very public about what the responsibility is on both sides. As a consumer, we freely give up data that we are conscious of, and then we also give up data that we're not always conscious of, like all the things we've talked about, the environment that we're operating from and so forth. And that data certainly gives us a more encompassing and beneficial experience, right? But from a security testing point of view, a lot of what we do is focus on how vulnerable is the data that's being collected. how vulnerable is your application, certainly to a penetration attack or to being hacked, as you might say. But then once it is penetrated, how vulnerable is the data that's been stored? And that's really two components of the work that we do for our customers in this case. And I think the thing that is most often either underestimated or overlooked from the clients that we work with is, sure, it's not about whether a bad actor wants your data or is trying to get to your particular site, and you may not even have anything that you think they want. But as soon as you take a username and a password, that's what they want, right? And it may not be to get back into your site, but because so many people use that same username and that same password for something that is of value, that's where your risk and your liability become a major component of this type of testing. So the minute really the minute Brice says, use this on your form, that's when we have to say, okay, now what happens with that data, right? Put the form in, and then, great, now what are we doing? Is the data encrypted in transmission? Is it encrypted in our database? Who has access to that? What if there is a breach on the firewall? What if someone leaves a laptop behind? These are the things that we have to think through when we build a security vulnerability assessment or a security vulnerability strategy. And a lot of the work that we do to perform those tests are to do the things that the bad actors might do. So we talk about ethical hacking or the type of creation of nefarious scripts and so forth that would attempt to penetrate that network and identify the data that's in the system.
Yeah, that's all really important stuff. I think on our end, we're dealing a lot with perception of security, right? So, even something like some people may not be, clearly conscious about the difference in an SSL secured website, HTTP versus HTTPS. But when Google gives them a warning that they're about to go to an unsecure site that's not HTTPS, then all of a sudden their red flags go off, right? So even the subsequent actions from that point forward are going to be biased because they've seen a warning message about that website. So then when you kind of get past that and you're dealing with assuming the site is secure, it's still these additional levels of making me feel like I'm working with a company that's going to take care of my stuff, right? So your policies, do people even use or read the privacy policy or terms of use or any of that kind of stuff? Well, yeah, sometimes they do. So you have to kind of look at the data. Some sites have more users looking at that information than others. Yep. And also, third-party, credentials. Does anybody look at those credentials in the footer? Yeah, we actually ran a bunch of tests on our own e-commerce site where we tested taking those security credentials that we often tuck into the footer because that's where it's supposed to go because of best practices and because that's the way we've done it for 20 years. We tested putting those in the header because we felt like communicating the security of the website was so impactful to the user's decision to buy from us. That should be one of the first things that they see, and we got about a 14% lift in conversions. So there's a lot of things you can do around the perception of the security of the website. But then there's kind of, Bill, what you're asking about with the structure of the form itself. And what I was talking about a while ago with, if the fewer questions you ask, the less friction there is, right? So in theory, you get a higher conversion rate the fewer questions you ask. But if I'm applying for a new mortgage, I'm not expecting that you can generate a quote from me on my email address and my name alone. Right. So I'm expecting to give you more. Now we're dealing with a level of congruence between what you're asking me for and what I'm expecting to get out of it. So if you ask me for my address, that seems like I might need to give you that for a mortgage, but not for a white paper download. If you ask me for my spouse's name, that makes sense for a mortgage, but it doesn't make sense for a white paper download, right? So it has a lot to do with the congruency and making me feel like you're not asking me things that aren't necessary for the action or the reward that I'm going to get out of it. So again, against popular belief, a lot of times you can actually lengthen the form and increase the conversions because it seems more congruent with a bigger outcome.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Brian and Brice, for joining us today. We're going to go into some Q&A and and Brian and Brice will be available to answer any questions or any comments that you have on today.